In a quiet suburban town surrounded by fields and winding roads, Alex Woodworth lived a life that appeared ordinary on the surface. He worked part-time at a local cafe, loved long walks through the neighborhood, and spent hours tucked away in bookstores. He was the type of person who avoided drama, someone who preferred calm conversations and the steady rhythm of routine. To those around him, Alex's presence was grounding, and many admired how thoughtful and intelligent he was. Yet, beneath the stillness of his life, events were forming that would shatter not only his world but the peace of the entire town. Alex's path began to shift when he became closer to two women, Maya and Brooke. Maya had been in his circle for years. She respected him, leaned on his kindness, and valued the steady friendship they shared. Brooke, on the other hand, entered his life with a force that was difficult to ignore. She was magnetic, bold, and unpredictable. At first, Alex thought Brooke's energy was refreshing. She seemed spontaneous, full of life, and unafraid to speak her mind. But soon, it became clear that her attachment to him was more than simple affection. Brooke quickly grew fixated on Alex. She admired not just his kindness but the way he carried himself, as if he were someone meant to rescue her from her own chaos. She began to blur the lines between admiration and possession. To her, Alex wasn't just a person. He was an anchor she believed she had a right to control. Maya noticed it before Alex did. She saw the way Brooke inserted herself into his daily life, the way she hovered, the way her eyes followed him whenever they were in the same room. Maya tried to warn him, but Alex, ever patient, brushed it off as harmless intensity. Around town, people started noticing Brooke's behavior. Some whispered that she was obsessed, others laughed it off as dramatic. But Brooke's presence lingered everywhere Alex went. She showed up at the cafe more often than customers usually did, sometimes sitting for hours just to watch him work. When he left, she found reasons to follow or to call, spinning excuses about why she needed to talk. Her fixation was becoming impossible to ignore, but Alex still thought he could manage it. He didn't see the danger that was growing with every passing day. The love triangle, though not fully acknowledged, became the quiet talk of the community. Those who knew Alex well worried about him. They admired his loyalty and kindness, but they also saw how easily those qualities could trap him in a situation he didn't want. Maya's role in all of this made things even more complicated. Brooke viewed her as competition, someone standing in the way of her control. That resentment simmered beneath the surface, quietly feeding into darker thoughts. It was in this seemingly calm town that everything was about to unravel. What started as friendship, admiration, and subtle rivalry was slowly twisting into a dangerous game of possession. Alex, unaware of the storm approaching, continued his days as though nothing could truly disturb the peace he believed he had. He couldn't see how close obsession was creeping, nor how quickly it would lead to horror. As the weeks passed, the fragile balance around Alex began to crumble. What had once seemed like an ordinary friendship tangled with a hint of jealousy started to take on a much darker tone. Maya could see the signs more clearly than anyone else. She knew Brooke was not simply protective or emotional. Her behavior went beyond that. Brooke's presence was constant, suffocating, and filled with an intensity that grew more disturbing every day. She seemed to watch everything Alex did, almost as though she were documenting his life in her mind, determined to make him hers no matter the cost. Alex, in his quiet way, tried to manage the tension. He cared deeply about both women, but not in the same way. He valued Maya as a true friend, someone who understood him and shared his sense of calm. With Brooke, he felt conflicted. At times, he was drawn to her energy, but more often, he felt trapped by it. He began creating distance, avoiding her calls and declining her sudden invitations. Yet, the more he pulled away, the more determined she became to keep him close. What Alex saw as boundaries, Brooke saw as betrayal. Brooke's jealousy soon turned into obsession. She began showing up at Alex's workplace at odd hours, sometimes waiting outside until he finished his shift. Her messages grew longer, more frantic, and sometimes aggressive. She wanted to know where he was, who he was with, and why he wasn't answering immediately. For Alex, it was overwhelming, but he tried to remain patient, hoping her behavior would eventually calm down. What he didn't realize was that her fixation was only deepening. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Maya, concerned for her friend's safety, stumbled upon Brooke's private journal. Within its pages were disturbing entries written in uneven handwriting. Brooke described Alex not as a person but as a possession, someone she could not live without. There were pages filled with resentment toward Maya, written with a venom that shocked anyone who read them. Brooke had scribbled thoughts about how no one else deserved him, how Maya was a threat, and how she would ensure Alex never abandoned her. It was clear these weren't just fleeting emotions, they were escalating into dangerous fantasies. The journal also revealed how Brooke's mind was unraveling. She detailed scenarios where Alex was forced to choose her and only her, with dark outcomes if he refused. While Maya was horrified, she struggled with what to do next. She warned Alex, but he hesitated to take the warnings seriously. He didn't want to believe that someone he had once cared for could be capable of violence. His gentle nature blinded him to the reality of the danger closing in around him. Meanwhile, Brooke's resentment toward Maya reached a breaking point. She began spreading rumors, trying to damage her reputation, and making it clear to anyone who would listen that Maya was the enemy. The triangle that had once been whispered about in small conversations was now boiling into something everyone in the town could sense. People began to talk not with humor, but with unease, as though they knew something terrible was coming. What no one could see was how far Brooke was willing to go. The tension had moved past jealousy and entered a space where reason no longer mattered. Alex thought he was handling the situation quietly, but in truth, he was standing at the edge of a dangerous path that would soon spiral out of his control. The cracks in the triangle were widening, and nothing could hold it together for much longer. The night that would change everything began like any other. The air was cool, and a faint breeze moved through the empty suburban streets. Alex, weary from weeks of stress and confusion, decided it was time to finally confront Brooke and put an end to the tension that had been consuming his life. He told no one where he was going, though his unease was obvious to those who saw him that day. He carried himself with the heavy steps of someone who wanted resolution, someone who believed that if he just spoke honestly, the storm would finally pass. He didn't realize that this decision would lead him directly into the darkest moment of his life. Later that evening, Alex's car was found parked near the edge of a wooded trail just outside of town. It wasn't unusual for locals to visit the area during the day, but at night it was deserted, cloaked in silence except for the sound of branches rustling in the wind. Inside the vehicle, investigators later found his jacket, phone, and wallet, all neatly left behind, as if he hadn't expected to be gone for long. Nothing seemed out of place at first, yet the emptiness inside the car hinted that something had gone terribly wrong. When Alex failed to return home, his friends grew concerned. He wasn't the type to vanish without explanation. Search efforts began early the next morning, volunteers combing through the wooded trails while officers worked to piece together where he had last been seen. Hours passed with no sign of him, until one of the search teams stumbled upon a clearing deeper in the forest. There, lying on the cold ground, was Alex's lifeless body. The scene was brutal. His injuries made it clear that this was no accident. This was an act of violence driven by something more than impulse. It carried the mark of rage. The discovery stunned the town. News spread quickly, and whispers turned into gasps of horror. How could someone like Alex, known for his quiet kindness, end up the victim of such a violent end? The grief was immediate, but alongside it came questions. Who could have done this, and why? Investigators moved quickly, piecing together the final hours of his life. They learned that Alex had gone to meet Brooke that night. Her name surfaced again and again as friends and acquaintances shared what they had seen over the past months. Her obsession, her possessiveness, and her growing hostility toward Maya painted a troubling picture. Evidence from the crime scene deepened suspicions. Footprints were discovered near the clearing, their size and shape matching Brooke's shoes. A discarded weapon, partially hidden in the grass, bore traces that linked back to her. Forensic teams worked carefully, but the pattern was becoming undeniable. Every clue pointed in one direction, and that direction led straight to Brooke. When confronted with questions about Alex, Brooke offered an account that immediately raised doubts. She claimed he had left her to meet someone else, that she had nothing to do with his disappearance. But her story shifted with every retelling, details contradicting one another until it became clear she was hiding something. What she couldn't hide were the marks left behind, the traces of her presence woven into the very fabric of the crime scene. The small town, once defined by quiet days and friendly neighbors, was now the setting of a nightmare. People who had once laughed at Brooke's dramatic behavior were now forced to admit they had underestimated her. The love triangle that had been whispered about in gossip had exploded into tragedy, and the truth of what had happened on that fatal night was only beginning to surface. When Brooke was finally brought into the interrogation room, the atmosphere shifted. Detectives had already gathered enough evidence to know she wasn't being honest, but they needed to hear the truth from her own lips. At first, she was calm, almost disturbingly composed. She repeated the same story she had given before, insisting Alex had left her that night to meet someone else. Yet the cracks in her account appeared almost immediately. Timelines didn't add up, and investigators pressed harder, showing her the photographs of footprints, the weapon found near the body, and the inconsistencies in her statements. As the hours wore on, Brooke's calm exterior began to fracture. She shifted in her chair, her voice rising as she tried to argue her way out of the mounting evidence. Finally, under relentless questioning, she broke. The words that spilled out were chilling, not just because of what she confessed but because of how she described it. She admitted that she had lured Alex out to the trail that night, telling him she wanted to talk and find closure. In her mind, this was the meeting where he would finally choose her, where he would cut Maya out of his life completely. She described how, in the clearing, she confronted him, her emotions spilling over into anger. When Alex refused to give her what she demanded, something inside her snapped. Brooke admitted to the attack, though the way she spoke about it unnerved everyone in the room. There was no deep remorse in her words, only a twisted logic where she portrayed herself as a victim of rejection, cornered by her own desperation. She claimed she never meant for it to go so far, yet her journal told a different story. Investigators revealed the entries they had discovered, pages filled with fantasies of forcing Alex to stay, of eliminating anyone who stood in her way. These weren't the scribbles of someone caught off guard. This was planning, obsession turned into action long before that night. The trial that followed gripped the entire town. The courtroom was filled with friends, neighbors, and reporters, all eager to understand how such an unthinkable act had come to pass. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Brooke's obsession, showing the jury her writings, her erratic behavior, and the evidence from the crime scene. Witnesses spoke about the way she stalked Alex, the threats she hinted at, and the jealousy that consumed her. Each testimony added another layer to the image of a woman who had allowed obsession to drive her past the point of reason. Brooke's defense tried to argue that she was unstable, that her mental state clouded her judgment and diminished her responsibility. But the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. The journal entries were impossible to dismiss. They showed a deliberate thought process, a person imagining the act before it ever happened. The jury didn't see a woman who had simply lost control. They saw someone who had plotted, obsessed, and ultimately acted on those dark thoughts. When the verdict was read, the weight of the room was palpable. Brooke was found guilty of murder, her fate sealed by the words she had written long before the crime. She was sentenced to life in prison, her future as confined as the twisted fantasies she once committed to paper. For those watching, the confession and the trial left a lingering chill. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that haunted them, it was the realization that obsession, left unchecked, could turn love into something monstrous. After the trial ended and Brooke was taken away to serve her sentence, the town tried to return to normal, but the shadow of what had happened lingered in every corner. People found it hard to believe that the same streets they walked every day, the same quiet woods they had explored as children, had become the backdrop to a nightmare. The murder of Alex Woodworth left scars that no verdict or sentence could heal. His absence was felt most deeply by his family, who struggled to navigate the grief of losing a son whose life had been cut short so brutally. They remembered him not as a victim but as the gentle, thoughtful man he had always been, yet the manner of his death haunted their every memory. For Maya, the aftermath was even more complicated. She carried a heavy burden of guilt, believing her friendship with Alex had somehow fueled Brooke's rage. Friends tried to remind her that the blame rested solely with Brooke, but Maya couldn't shake the thought that if she had stepped away, Alex might still be alive. Nights were restless, filled with replayed moments, questions she could never answer, and an emptiness that would not fade. Her life became divided into two parts, the time before that night in the woods and the time after. The laughter she once shared with Alex was now just an echo, and each day was a reminder of how fragile and unpredictable life could be. The community as a whole was unsettled. Neighbors who once dismissed Brooke's behavior as dramatic gossip now spoke of her in hushed tones, shocked that the warnings were there all along but never taken seriously. Parents warned their children to pay closer attention to the people they allowed into their lives, to never underestimate the danger that could hide behind obsession. The case became a cautionary tale told at gatherings, a reminder that darkness can grow quietly until it consumes everything. In prison, Brooke's presence was said to be as unnerving as ever. Reports suggested she showed little remorse, her obsession with Alex preserved in her writings even after his death. To many, this only deepened the horror. It wasn't just that she had taken a life, it was that she continued to live inside the twisted narrative she had built, as though reality itself couldn't pull her out of it. Her cell became the last stage of her obsession, a place where she replayed the choices that had destroyed so many lives. Over time, the town began to heal, though the process was slow. A small memorial was placed near the wooded trail where Alex's life ended, a quiet marker that people visited to leave flowers or reflect in silence. It became a symbol not only of loss but of resilience, a place where the community could come together and remember the good rather than the horror. Alex's story, though tragic, became a reminder of how important it is to recognize the signs of obsession, to understand the dangers of ignoring what seems like small red flags. The case of Alex Woodworth left behind more than grief, it left a lesson etched into the hearts of everyone who followed it. Love, when twisted into obsession, can lose its meaning entirely. What begins as affection can turn into control, and control can quickly spiral into violence. The story stood as proof that no matter how ordinary a place may seem, darkness can find its way in, leaving devastation in its wake. For those who loved Alex, the memory of who he was would always remain stronger than the horror of how his life ended.